I have a number of friends that have been very successful in the graphic design industry. They're wonderful artists, but they've learned that magical ability to sort of shut their id off,
right,
and their ego off, and to just, you can create the best thing you've ever created, but Walmart might not like that.
Right,
so.
right, and that's the conversation I had just the other day with another person on the conversation, was the fact that commissions can really be soul purging undertakings, even if it's your own art.
Yes,
but much less if it's you trying to create a one-page spread for a muffler shop. It becomes even more soul-sucking. Right?
Absolutely. And some people love it. There are people that are so amazingly good at it,
Absolutely.
and they don't confuse their graphic design with their art. And I couldn't make that distinction.
Right. And it's we try the best we can to compartmentalize, but I think part of the reason I enjoy being an art educator is the fact that I don't have to compartmentalize as much. I can. It's like my teaching practice is part of my professional practice.
Oh, that's exactly how I look at what I do. I couldn't be the artist I am if I didn't teach. In fact, I have an issue with any artist that's like, I can only be an artist. I can't handle anything else in my life. Mm-hmm. I've got to hole myself up in my studio and be a hermit. And very few artists in history ever worked that way.
Right.
You look at Vermeer, and he was an art dealer and had a house full of kids.
Right.
Rubens was a goddamn ambassador, and people had other stuff going on and didn't inform their art in the most incredible ways.
Right.
I think there's a danger of being this like hermetic, navel-gazing, contemplative artist.
Right.
I think you start making work that, for lack of a better term, is almost masturbatory.
Right. The monastic life just of an artist, it all becomes very self-indulgent.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so you go to Lubbock. So what attracts you there is it the program or the availability of that financially it was a good fit?
It was a good fit, and it was my ignorance at that time about what my options were.
Right.
I went there. It was a good fit for me. It was a wonderful fit for me because in Lubbock, if you're an art undergrad, you make art or you do nothing, pretty much nothing else. It was very good for me. I could pour myself into it. And so when I switched from graphic design over photography, I did a photography major and a printmaking minor. Okay. And was pretty much equally involved in both of those throughout the rest of my undergrad and my graduate.
Right. And so you finish up in Lubbock. Do you go to graduate school right away? Or
Immediately. Immediately. My printmaking professor at Tech hooked me up with the head of photography at University of Kentucky.
Okay. And
got me an incredible deal to go straight there. He had a lot of faith in me, and I really appreciated that. But I went with a full ride.
That's great.
To Lexington. And it was another really unusual art program in that, there was really no professors of note there at all. But what fascinated me is the studios and a lot of the classes were in an old tobacco warehouse called the Reynolds Building. And so there was tons of space.
Right.
There was so much space, and you got a pretty sizable studio to work in. And it really worked for me.
Sure.
Because at that time I was trying to figure out who I was and what kind of art I was going to make and what I was going to do with it, and that was a great location.
Right. So, what was the transition like going to Lexington? What?
Well, all my family is from the mountains of North Carolina.
Okay.
So
it felt familiar. It felt even down to the Reynolds name. Right?
Yes, very much so. But even the distance between the mountains of North Carolina and Lexington, Kentucky is huge culturally. Lexington exists in this strange world that it's not the South, but it's definitely not the North. But the culture changes so drastically about 70 miles north of you, because you get to the Ohio River and then you get to Cincinnati.
Right.
And then you're solidly in the Midwest. It's so strange how it happens right there. But Lexington is, it was a gorgeous city. It was a very cultural city. It was a racist city, and I was used to a little more integration than what I was ready for up in Lexington, because they still literally had the wrong side of the tracks there, and it was train tracks and that separated the two sections of town.
Wow. And so we go to Lexington, huge studio space, photography, printmaking. You're probably doing some student teaching.
Yeah. I was very fortunate. I immediately taught for my first year. It was a 3-year program. For my first year, I taught 2D design.
Okay.
And for the next 2 years, I taught photography. And I had a solid class every semester. So that was my first intro to teaching.
Great. And so when you get out of there, do you immediately head back towards Texas, or where's the road go from there?
Yeah, it's a little complicated, because I never wanted to come back to Dallas. I had considered my time here done, and I was one of those people that's like, okay, I'm an artist, so I'm going to go to New York, I'm going to go to Chicago, I'm going to go to LA, I'm going to go to one of these places when I finish my master's. And between my the summer between my undergraduate and graduate year, I met Steve, my husband.
Wow.
And in a very unusual way, I was trying one night to just get up the nerve to go to a gay bar. I wasn't even ready to admit to myself I was gay at all. I mean, it was, and I couldn't even get the nerve to park. I mean, I circled around a couple of times, and I was so apoplectic and heart beating, and I was like, I can't do this. And so I turned to go home, and I pulled up at a stoplight and looked over, and he was at that stoplight, and he had driven from Keller trying to get the nerve to go into a gay bar and couldn't either. And our eyes locked, and I was panicked. I wanted to push the accelerator and just go home. But I didn't, and I went through the stoplight, and he followed me, and we turned a few corners, and then we stopped at a stop and go, and talked a few minutes and traded numbers, and we got a Coke.
Wow.
And I was so panicked, I went home, and I couldn't believe that I'd done that. He had called a couple of times, and I said, man, I don't know why I did that. Let's not talk anymore. But I couldn't stop thinking about him, and then I called him the next summer, and we went out 3 times, and then the third night he was kind of being awkward, and he said, well, I'm getting married.
Oh, wow.
So,
I wasn't anticipating that part of the story.
No, nobody does. I'm giving you the condensed cliff notes.
No, I understand.
On this, but I went to Lexington, and he got married, and then we became best friends over the phone.
Wow.
And his marriage only lasted 6 months, and then we became long distance, committed to each other. And so I was up in Lexington, he was in Dallas, but then all of a sudden it became obvious that when I graduated from Lexington, I was going to move back to Dallas.
Right.
And moved back here and immediately set up a studio. And, what do you do with a Master of Fine Arts? I started waiting tables. Which is the joke sometimes when I look back at my collar that I wore as a MFA candidate. You look at everybody else's collars, and they're green and orange and yellow, and what's yours? It's brown. Right. It's brown.
Right. And so so you're waiting tables, and so how do you get from there? So where's your first? Where's that seminal event where you go from, the person in the brown collar who's waiting tables to actually getting traction? Where there had to be some place where you you continue to make work, and then you're kind of grinding away, and someone takes notice.
It's interesting that you asked that, because the MFA was great at learning to make work and the time to make work, but no one that taught had any sort of experience or success in the visual arts world. And so there was no discussion at all about how to make a living as an artist. And in fact, there was a lot of strange, advice given, sort of. If no one's responding to your art, it's because your art's so ahead of its time that people don't know how to respond to it. And, even back then I would listen to that advice and say, or maybe it's because your art sucks, And so I moved to Dallas, and I sort of had this idea that I wanted to be an artist, and I didn't know how to proceed. I had a studio in Deep Ellum on Main Street, and started making art. I started doing some covers for some weekly publications and little photographs for that, and I kept pounding the doors of galleries with my work, and back then it was slides, so leaving slides and stuff. I ended up getting a show at a couple of alternative spaces very, very early on, probably 3 to 4 months after I moved back.
Okay.
And from then, once I got those 2 solo gigs, and people started looking at the work, it showed me a path forward.
Okay.
Oddly, Steve and I were both still thinking that we would only be in Dallas a couple of years, and then we'd move someplace else. And 30 years later, a quick 30 years later. But I started trying to get in as many exhibitions as I could, and try to enter as many contests as I could, and kept pushing the work and challenging myself. And when people wouldn't respond to the work, I didn't think, well, it's because the work is so advanced that people don't know how to respond to it. I did have maybe this sucks, maybe I need to retool it. And so I did work and develop and alter the work a lot until I found something that resonated not only with me, but that resonated with other people.
Sure.
And not long after that, I was picked up by my first real gallery, and was with them for a few years. Had a number of shows that got attention of, actually what excited me more than the attention of sales is the attention of other artists.
Sure.
I felt being respected was even more important than selling.
Sure.
At that time. And there were a number of artists that really started talking to me and liked what I was doing. And, that was my first entry into the club.
Yeah, I think that, that's a really good point, that I think there's a place where you can be making work that is selling, but maybe falls more into a category of decor than a category of art. And just because it's selling doesn't mean you're actually getting the same amount of personal gratification, of what you've produced. But I think there's also something in there that you're talking about in terms of how do you filter out the feedback that you get, whose opinion do you respect? I mean, if someone's you certainly don't want to change your work based on bad feedback, right?
No, you don't, but all feedback's important, even the bad feedback. I mean, there's certain people I know when they respond a certain way and dislike the work, I know I am in fact on the right track. As a kid, I never fit in. As an artist, I still have kind of taken the command of not fitting in.
Okay.
And have tried to create an art that purposefully doesn't kind of fit in a neat point. And listening to advice and knowing when to take it, knowing when to listen to it, that, that's their opinion, is a skill that it takes you years to learn to do. And learn to filter. And listening to everybody has helped me quite a lot.
So your work, you describe it as you as an artist